The continued story of Taryn, the assistant pigkeeper. I'm glad you've stayed to listen. Now sit round, as Papa Bear reads a story. Chapter 11. The Cottage. Taryn spun round and raised his sword. Suddenly in his hand writhed a cold serpent, hissing and twisting to strike. With a cry of horror he flung it away. The serpent fell to the ground, and there in its place lay Taryn's blade. Elenwy stifled a scream. Taryn drew back fearfully. Facing him was a short and rather plump little woman with a round, lumpy face and a pair of very sharp black eyes. Her hair hung like a clump of discolored marsh weeds, bound with vines and ornamented with bejeweled pins that seemed to lose themselves in the hopeless tangle. She wore a dark, shapeless, ungirt robe, covered with patches and stains. Her feet were bare and exceptionally large. The companions drew closer together. Gurgi, trembling violently, crouched behind Taryn. The bard, looking pale and uneasy, nevertheless prepared to stand his ground.
"Come along, my ducklings,"
the enchantress said cheerfully.
"I promise it won't hurt a bit. You can bring your sword if you want,"
she added with an indulgent smile at Taryn.
"though you won't need it. Never seen a toad with a sword. On the other hand, I've never seen a sword with a toad, so you're welcome to do as you please."
"We please to stay as we are," cried Elenwy. "Don't think we're going to let anybody—"
"Who are you?" Taryn cried.
"We've done you no harm. You have no cause to threaten us."
"How many twigs in a bird's nest?"
asked the enchantress suddenly.
"Answer quickly. There, you see," she added. "Poor chicks, you don't even know that. How could you be expected to know what you really want out of life?"
"One thing I do want," retorted Elenwy, "is not to be a toad."
"You're a pretty little duck,"
said the enchantress in a kind, cudgeling voice.
"Would you give me your hair once you've done with it? I have such trouble with mine these days. Do you ever have the feeling things are disappearing into it and you might never see them again?"
"No matter," she went on.
"You'll enjoy being toads, skipping about here and there, sitting on toadstools. Well, perhaps not that. Toads don't really sit on toadstools. But you might dance in dew circles. Now there's a charming thought. Don't be afraid," she added,
leaning over and whispering in Taryn's ear.
"You can't for a moment imagine I'd do all I said. Goodness, no. I wouldn't dream of stepping on you. I couldn't stand the squashiness."
With mounting terror, Taryn cast desperately about in his mind for some means of saving his companions. He would have considered this dishevelled creature's intentions as mad and impossible had he not remembered the serpent in his hand, its menacing fangs and cold eyes.
"You mightn't like being toads at first,"
the enchantress said reasonably.
"It takes getting used to. But,"
she added in a reassuring tone,
"once it's happened, I'm sure you wouldn't want it any other way."
"Why are you doing this?"
Taryn cried with all the more anger at feeling himself powerless. He turned his head in fear and revulsion at the enchantress, as the enchantress gave him a kindly pat on the cheek.
"Can't have people poking and prying," she said. "You understand that much, don't you? Make an exception for one, then it's two, three, the next thing you know, hundreds and hundreds trampling things and getting underfoot. Believe me, this is best for everybody."
From around the side of the hill, at that moment, two more figures appeared. Both closely resembled the stout little woman, except that one wore a black cloak with the hood pulled up, nearly concealing her face, and at the throat of the other hung a necklace of milky white stones. The enchantress ran to them and called out happily,
"Orwin, Orgok, hurry, we're going to make them toads."
Taryn gasped. He shot a quick glance at the bard and Elenwy.
"Did you hear those names?" he whispered hurriedly. "We found them."
The bard's face was filled with alarm.
"Much good may it do us," he said. "By the time they're through, I don't think we'll care much about the cauldron or anything else. I've never danced in a dew circle," he continued under his breath. "In different circumstances I might enjoy it, but not now," he added with a shudder. "I've never met a person," whispered Elenwy, while Gurgi snuffled in fright, "who could touch about such dreadful things and smile at the same time. It's like ants walking up and down your back."
"We must try to take them unawares," Taryn said. "I don't know what they can do to all of us at once. I don't even think if there's anything we can do to them, but we must take the chance. One or two of us may survive." "I suppose that's all we can do," agreed the bard. He swallowed with difficulty and gave Taryn a worried look. "If it should turn out that I mean to say, if I should be
Yes, well, what I mean is, should anything happen to me, I beg you, pay attention where you tread. Meantime, the three enchantresses had returned to the cottage.
Oh, Ordu,
The one with the necklace was saying,
must it always be toads? Can't you think of anything else? But they're so neat,
replied Ordu.
compact and convenient. What's wrong with toads?
Asked the hooded one.
That's the trouble with you always, Orwin. Always trying to make things complicated. I only suggested something else,
Orgok, answered the enchantress called Orwin.
for the sake of variety.
I love toads, murmured Orgok, smacking her lips. Even in the shadow of the hood, Terran could see the features of the enchantress, moving and twitching in what he feared was impatience.
Look at them standing there,
Ordu said. Poor little goslings, all wet and muddy. I've been talking to them, and I think they finally realize what's best for them.
Why, those are the ones we saw galloping across the marsh,
said Orwin, toying with her beads.
It was so clever of you,
she added, smiling at Terran,
to have the huntsman swallowed up in the bog. Really quite well done.
Disgusting creatures, huntsmen, muttered Orgok. Nasty, hairy, vicious things. They turn my stomach. They stick to their work, ventured the bard. I'll say that much for them. We had a flock of huntsmen here the other day, said Ordu. They were poking and prying around just as you were. Now you understand why I said we couldn't make exceptions.
We didn't make exceptions for them, did we, Ordu?
Said Orwin.
Though it wasn't toads, if you remember.
I remember very distinctly, my dear, replied the first enchantress. But you are Ordu then, and when you're being Ordu you can do as you please. But I'm Ordu today, and what I say is...
That's not fair,
interrupted Orgok.
You always want to be Ordu. I've had to be Orgok 3 times in a row, while you've only been Orgok once.
It's not my fault, my sweet, said Ordu. If we don't like being Orgok, it is uncomfortable, you know. You have such horrid indigestion. If you'd only pay more attention to what you take for your meals. Terran had been trying to follow this conversation of the enchantresses, but found himself more confused than ever. Now he had no clear idea which was really Ordu, Orwen, or Orgok, or whether they were all three the same. However, their remarks about the huntsmen gave him hope for the first time. If the huntsmen of Anuvan are your enemies, Terran said, then we have common cause. We too have fought against them. Enemies, friends, it all comes down to the same in the end, muttered Ordu. Do make haste, Orgok, and take them off to the shed. It's been a terribly long morning. You are a greedy creature, said Ordu, with a tolerant smile at the hooded crone. There's another reason why neither of us wants to be Orgok, if we can possibly help it. Perhaps if you learn to control yourself better. Now listen to what these dear mice have to tell us. It should be interesting. They say such charming things. Ordu turned to Terran. Now, my duckling, she said pleasantly, how did it come about that you're on such bad terms with the huntsmen? Terran hesitated, fearful of revealing Gwydion's plan. They attacked us, he began. Of course they did, my poor goslings, said Ordu with sympathy. They're always attacking everybody. That's one of the advantages of being toads. You needn't worry about such things any more. It would be all romps in the forest and lovely wet mornings. The huntsmen won't vex you any more. True, you shall have to keep an eye out for herons and kingfishers and serpents, but apart from that, you won't have a care in the world.
But who is us?
Interrupted Orwin. She turned to Ordu.
Aren't you going to find out their names? Yes, by all means,
murmured Orgok, with a lip-smacking sound.
I love names.
Once again, Terran hesitated. This, he said, gesturing toward Elenwy, is Indeg, and Prince Glessig. Orwin giggled and gave Ordu an affectionate nudge. Listen to them, she said. They're delightful when they lie. If they won't give us their right names, said Orgok, then simply take them. Terran stopped short. Ordu was studying them closely. With sudden discouragement, he realized his efforts were useless. This is Elenwy, daughter of Angered, he said, and Fluter Flam, a bard of the harp, Fluter added. And this is Gurgi, Terran continued. So that's a Gurgi, said Orwin, with great interest.
It seems to me I've heard of them, but I never know what they were.
It's not a Gurgi, retorted Ellenby. It's Gurgi, and there's only one.
Yes, yes,
Gurgi put in, venturing to step from behind Terran.
and he is bold and clever. He will not let brave companions become toads with humpings and jumpings.
Orgok looked curiously at him.
What do you do with a Gurgi? She asked. Do you eat it or sit on it?
I should think, Ordu suggested, whatever you did, you would have to clean it first. And you, my duck, she said to Terran. Who are you? Terran straightened and threw back his head. I am Terran, he said, assistant pig-keeper of Care Dallben.
Dallben! cried Ordu. You poor lost chicken, why didn't you say so in the first place? Tell me, how is dear little Dallben?
Chapter 12 Little Dallben. Terran's jaw dropped. Before he could answer, the enchantresses had crowded around the companions and were leading them to the cottage. In wonder, he turned to Fluter, who looked less pale now that Ordu had stopped speaking of toads. Little Dallben? Terran whispered. I've never in my life heard anyone talk about him that way. Can they mean the same Dallben?
I don't know, whispered the bard in return. But if they think it is, great Beelan, don't tell them otherwise.
Inside, with a great deal of joyous bustling that in fact accomplished little, the enchantresses hurried to straighten up the chamber. Orwin, in obvious excitement and delight, brought out a number of rickety chairs and stools. Orgok cleared the table of crockery by brushing it onto the floor. Ordu clapped her hands and beamed at the companions.
I should never have thought it,
she began. Oh, no, 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 my duck, she cried suddenly to Ellenby, who had drawn closer to the loom, and had just bent to examine the fabric.
Mustn't touch. Nasty prickles if you do. It's full of nettles. Come sit with us. There's a love.
Despite the sudden warmth of their welcome, Terran glanced at the enchantresses with uneasiness. The chamber itself filled him with odd forebodings he could not name, which eluded him like shadows. Gurgi and the bard, however, appeared delighted at the strange turn of events, and set heartily to eating the food that soon arrived at the table. Terran looked questioningly at Ellenby. The girl guessed his thought. Don't be afraid to eat, she said behind her hand. It's perfectly all right, not the least bit poisonous or enchanted, I can tell. I learned how when I was staying with Queen Akron, and learning to be a sorceress. What you do is—
Now, my sparrow,
Ordu interrupted.
you must tell us about dear little Dallben. What is he doing? Does he still have the Book of Three?
Well, yes. Why, yes, he does, Terran said with some confusion, beginning to wonder if the enchantresses did not know more about Dallben than he did.
Poor little Robin, remarked Ordu. And such a heavy book, I'm surprised he would even be able to turn the pages.
Well, you see, Terran said, still puzzled. The Dallben that we know, he isn't little. I mean, he's rather elderly. Elderly, burst out Fluter. He's every bit of 380 years old. Call himself told me.
He was such a dear, sweet little thing, said Orwin, with a sigh. All pink cheeks and chubby fingers. I love babies, said Orgok, smacking her lips.
His hair is quite gray, said Terran, who could not quite bring himself to believe these strange creatures were indeed speaking of his old teacher. The idea of the learned Dallben ever having pink cheeks and chubby fingers was beyond his imagination. He has a beard, too, he added. A beard? Cried Ordu. What's little Dallben doing with a beard? Why in the world should he want such a thing? Such a charming little tadpole.
We found him in the marsh one morning, said Orwin, all by himself in a great wicker basket. It was too sweet for words.
Orgok, of course. At this, Orgok made such an irritable noise, and her eyes glared from the depths of the hood.
Come now, Orgok, don't look so disagreeable, said Ordu.
Come now, Orgok, don't look so disagreeable, said Ordu. We're all friends together here. We can talk about such things now. Well, I shall put it this way, and spare Orgok's feelings. She didn't want to keep him, that is, not in the usual sense, but we did, and so we brought the poor fledgling to the cottage.
He grew very quickly, added Orwin. Why, it was no time before he was toddling around and talking and doing little errands. So kind and polite, a perfect joy. And you say he has a beard?
She shook her head.
Curious notion. Wherever did he find it?
Yes, a delightful little sparrow he was, said Ordu. But then, she continued with a sad smile, there was that distressing accident. We were brewing some herbs one morning, a rather special potion.
And Dallben,
sighed Orwin. A sweet little Dallben was stirring the kettle for us. It was one of those kind, thoughtful things he was always doing. But when it came to a boil, some of it bubbled up and splashed out. It burned his poor dear fingers, Ordu added. But he didn't cry, no indeed. He just popped his finger in his mouth, the brave little starling. Of course, some of the potion was still there, and he swallowed it. As soon as he did that, explained Orwin, he knew every bit as much as we did. It was a magical brew, you understand, a recipe for wisdom. After that, Ordu went on, it was out of the question to keep him with us. It would never have been the same, no. It would never have done at all. You can't have that many people knowing that much all under the same roof, especially since he was able to guess some of the things Orgok had in mind. And so we had to let him go, really let him go, that is. Orgok by this time was the one who wanted to keep him, in her own fashion, which I doubt he would have liked.
He would have been such a sweet little thing,
murmured Orgok. I must say we did quite handsomely by him, Ordu continued. We gave him the choice of a harp, a sword, or the Book of Three. Had he chosen the harp, he could have been the greatest bard in the world. The sword and the dear duckling could have ruled all Prydain. But, Ordu said, he chose the Book of Three, and to tell the truth, we were just as happy that he did, for it was heavy and mouldy, and did nothing but gather dust. And so he left to make his way in the world, and that was the last we saw of him. A good thing sweet, dear Dallben isn't here, Fluter chuckled to Terran. Their description hardly matches. I fear they might rather be startled. Terran had been silent throughout Ordu's account, wondering how he dared to bring up the matter of the cauldron. Dallben has been my master as long as I can remember, he said at last, deciding frankness was the best way to go about it, especially since the enchantresses seemed able to guess when he was not telling the truth. If you are as fond of him as I, we love him dearly, the sweet thing, said Ordu. You can be sure of that. Then I beg you to help us carry out his wishes, and the wishes of Gwydion, Prince of Dawn, Terran went on. He explained what had taken place at the council, what they had learned at Dark Gate from Gwistel. He spoke of the urgency of bringing the cauldron to Caer Dallben, and asked, too, whether the enchantresses had seen Ellidyr. Ordu shook her head. A son of Penliqueur? No, my duck. There's been no such person anywhere near. If he'd come across the marshes, we'd have been bound to see him.
We have a lovely view of the fens from the hilltop,
put in with such enthusiasm that her necklace bounced and rattled.
You must come and enjoy it. Indeed, you're perfectly welcome to stay as long as you want, she added eagerly. Now that little Dallben's gone and found himself a beard, too, the place isn't half as cheery as it used to be. We wouldn't change you into a toad, unless of course you insisted on it. Stay by all means,
croaked Orgok with a leer. Our task is to regain the cauldron, Terran pressed, preferring to overlook Orgok's remark. From what Gwistel told us.
You said his crow told you, my lamb,
interrupted Ordu.
Don't believe everything you hear from a crow.
Only of the fair folk believed him, Terran said. Do you tell me now that you have no cauldron? I ask you this in the name of Dallben himself.
Cauldron,
answered Ordu. Why, goodness, we have dozens. Cauldrons, kettles, cookpots. We can hardly keep track of them all. I speak of the cauldron of Anuvan, Terran said firmly. The cauldron of Auron and his deathless warriors.
Oh, said Ordu, laughing cheerfully. You must mean the Black Cauldron.
I do not know its names, Terran said, but that may be the one we seek.
Are you sure you wouldn't prefer one of the others? Asked Orwin. They're much more attractive than that old thing, and much more practical. What use have you for cauldron-born?
They would only be a nuisance. We can give you a kettle to brew the most marvelous sleeping potions, or one you can sprinkle on daffodils to take away that bilious yellow. Our concern is with the Black Cauldron, Terran insisted, deciding this was indeed the name of Auron's cauldron. Will you tell me the truth? Is the cauldron here? Of course it's here, replied Ordu. Why not, since it was ours to begin with, and always has been. Yours? cried Terran. Then Auron stole it from you. Stole? Ordu answered. Not exactly. No, we couldn't say it was stolen. But you couldn't have given it to Auron, Elenry cried, knowing what he meant to use it for? Even Auron had to be allowed to have his chance, said Ordu tolerantly. One day you'll understand why, for there is a destiny laid on everything, on big, ugly crocans, as well as poor little ducklings, and a destiny laid even on us. Besides, Auron paid dearly for the use of it, very dearly indeed, you can be sure. The details, my duckling, are a private nature, which does not concern you. In any case, the crocan was not to be his forever.
Oron swore to return it after a time, said Orwin. But when the time came, he broke his oath to us, as might be expected. Ill-advised, murmured Orgok.
And since he wouldn't give it back, Urdu said, what else could we do? We went and took it. Great Beelin, cried the bard. You three ladies ventured into the heart of Anuvan and carried the thing out. However did you manage? Urdu smiled. There are a number of ways, my curious sparrow. We could have flooded Anuvan with darkness and floated the cauldron out. We could have put all the guards to sleep, or we could have turned ourselves into... well, no matter. Let us say we could have used a variety of methods. In any case, the cauldron is here again. And, the enchantress added, here it will stay. No, no, she said, raising a hand to Terran. I can see you'd like to have it, but that's out of the question. Much too dangerous for wandering chicks like you. My goodness, we couldn't sleep at night. No, no, not even for the sake of little Dallben. In fact, Urdu went on, you'd be much safer being toads than having anything to do with the Black Cauldron. She shook her head. Better yet, we could change you into birds and have you fly back to Caer Dallben immediately. No, indeed, she continued, rising from the table and taking hold of Terran's shoulders. Off you ducklings must go, and never give a second thought to the Crocan. Tell dear little Dallben and Prince Gwydion we're terribly sorry, and if there's anything else we can possibly do, but not that. Oh my, no. Terran started to protest, but Urdu cut him off and guided him rapidly to the door, while the other enchantresses hustled the companions after him. You may sleep in the shed tonight, my chickens, said Urdu. Then first thing in the morning away with you to little Dallben, and you shall decide whether you'd rather go on your legs, or, she added, this time without a smile, on a pair of your own wings.
Or, muttered Orgok, hopping all the way.
This concludes Chapter 12. Thank you for listening, and remember, have a good day. You deserve it.